So, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world. And thank you for joining us for today's webinar from .com to .brand, your next digital advantage, presented by Abion. My name is Hayden Simpson. I'm head of global sales at Abion, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's session. We've got a lot to cover, but before we get going, a few housekeeping items. We do encourage questions throughout the presentation. You can enter those using the Q&A box in the online interface. We'll pick those up at the end. And if we don't have any time to follow up on all of them, then we'll get in touch with you directly after the event to talk through anything that's left over. Please note also today's session is being recorded, and we're happy to make that recording available to participants upon request. So please let us know. Happy to say that joining me today for this discussion, and it is going to be a discussion rather than us talking in slides for the next 30 to 40 minutes, is longtime industry veteran. I wasn't going to say old person, but let's use and domain name expert.
Thank you for the kindness.
But I will give him domain name expert, Matt Serlin. Matt recently joined us at Abion to lead our domain management efforts in the US. I'm sure many of you already know Matt, but he's been active in the domain name industry for over 20 years, working with some of the largest global brands on establishing, optimizing, and protecting their domain portfolios. He's been an active participant at ICANN and worked with a number of companies in support of the last round of the new GLTLDs back in 2012. And he's devastatingly handsome as well, obviously. It cost him a lot of money for me to say that. So with no further ado, let's get started and get into some of the meat and drink. I just want to quickly introduce Abion. Abion is a if you like a full service IP partner to many of the world's best brands. So we have expertise in trademarks, domain names, and brand protection, delivering full circle IP solutions with clear commercial perspective. We were founded in 1994, so have a lot of experience. We've got over 10,000 customers in 160 different countries and have over 250 colleagues and experts in 17 offices in 14 countries, advising a wide range of brands from the most well-known to the latest startups and unicorns. So we have a lot of experience. We have a lot of people with experience, and hopefully some of that can come to bear today to give you guys some interesting thoughts as we go through the discussion on .brands. So today's topics, we're going to cover what is a top-level TLD. We're going to go through a little bit of history, benefits of .brands, use cases, timelines, and associated costs. And then at the end, we will look at any Q&A that we have. What I should say is that there's been a huge amount of content over the last months and even years about .brands. Today's purpose is to give you an up-to-date view, a real view, if you like, as to where we are in the process, what we're talking about in terms of with our customers, and brands that are engaging with us from a .brand perspective, what lies ahead. And we are getting to slightly late in the process, I'd say. Maybe autumn, not winter of the process. We've still got a while to go, and there is plenty of time for people who want to engage at this late stage. So, anybody who's considering doing that, we'll talk through the practicalities of that. So some basic information to begin with, which I'll let Matt talk to, and then we'll get on to some more kind of discussion points as we go through. So Matt, over to you.
Indeed. Thanks, Hayden. And again, thanks everyone for joining us. Happy to be talking about my favorite topic, domain names, .brands, all that good stuff. So just as Hayden said, just to kind of level set here, when we talk about a TLD, it's really the last part of a qualified domain name that you see and interact with online every day. .com, .net, .org, .uk, things like .shop, and as we're going to talk about today, .brand. So things like .google, .amazon, .abbott. Those are just some of the .brand TLDs that we'll be using as examples as we go through today. So think of it as, like I said, just that final last part of the domain name. So a little bit of the history of sort of how we got here. As Hayden mentioned, there was a round of GTLDs back in 2012, but really, if you go into the Wayback Machine, and as Hayden mentioned, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and some of this stuff even predates me. So that's good to see. First domain name actually registered in 1985. Really, in the 90s and into the early 2000s was when the internet really kind of started to get its legs under it. Um, ICANN came in 1998, and ICANN, again, just to kind of level set, is really the sort of governing body, if you will, of the internet domain name system. We'll talk a little bit more about how they interact with .brands and the process that we have here. And so ICANN undertook actually several expansions of the namespace going back to early 2000s, I think 2001. They delegated a small number of TLDs, and then again in 2005. But really, it wasn't until that 2012 round that we saw just a huge explosion, several thousand applications for GTLDs, some of which are still being launched just today, in recent months, frankly.
Can I
So
can I
more
ask
than a
Matt on
dozen.
that? Sorry, can I ask on
Yeah, yeah.
that? What was the reason for that round opening in 2012, and is that still relevant to the round now?
Yeah. So ultimately, the charge of ICANN was to expand the competition within the domain name space. So they were sort of always meant to expand the number of TLDs. Like I mentioned, they did a small number in 2001, another half a dozen or so in 2005. But really, it was meant to uh, sort of be this process by which, really, at any time, someone could go and apply for a new top level domain. It this notion of having rounds was really meant to become more of a steady state over the course of time. And unfortunately, I think, just because of the way that things happen at ICANN, it hasn't panned out that way. And so one of the questions we still get is, well, if I don't apply, people asked in 2012, if I don't apply in 2012, when will the next opportunity be? I would not have told you it would have been, 12, 14 years later, to be honest with you. I didn't think it would take that long. If someone asks me in 2026, if I don't apply in 2026, when will the next opportunity be? I don't have a good answer. Again, I think ultimately ICANN and the community would like to get to a place where if it's 2027, 2028, 2031, whatever it may be, that if a party wants to apply for and run a GTLD, they're just able to do it. There's no notion of this opening and closing of rounds. But again, that's still to be seen. So we'll see if that's how it plays out. But again, it's taken at least a dozen years or more to really sort of get all of these TLDs that were applied for into the root zone, launched, and people actually using them and registering domain names. So unlike registering a domain name where I can go and register, Matt Serlin is the best.com and launch a website in a matter of hours, this is a much different kind of proposal. So with that, Hayden,
Great,
if you
thank
want
you.
to
Right,
kind
my
of
mute button was
yeah,
on.
let's.
I'm doing well today. Thank you for that. So yeah, benefits of a .brand domain. So I mean, I guess this is a little bit difficult to summarize in 5 minutes on a single slide, right? Because there are many aspects to this, and quite a few of those depend upon what industry .brand owners are in. There's some very, very solid use cases for security from a financial services perspective. There's solid user cases for benefits in terms of brand protection and anti-counterfeiting for luxury goods, for example. There are new concepts that can be tied to individual, .brands that are, based upon those notions of having your own namespace, managing everything within it, having that control, over that namespace now and forevermore in the future. So it's difficult to really summarize these things. So these 5 areas are really the kind of general ones that we talk about, as being applicable to pretty much every single dotBrand discussion that we have. There is no doubt in my mind that having your own dotBrand gives you enhanced brand recognition. It gives a focal point for your audience online, and it allows you to base all of your future marketing, whether that is on or offline, pushing that audience towards that single destination. And that, in my mind, will enhance not just your brand, but also the value of that asset that holds your brand. And that value will only continue to dominate in the future. I use an example of a well-known airways, a well-known airline that runs most of its operations, all of its customer service, its booking engine, etc., through a single .com domain that costs them probably around $25 a year. They take $14.8 billion in terms of revenue through that single point of contact, and so that asset is worth, I would suggest, more than $25 a year, and that can only be multiplied if you look at it as a brand asset. Again, I think being able to point your on and offline audience towards a single source is something that will promote customer trust. There are lots of studies out at the moment in terms of customer trust being enhanced if they can indeed trust that domain name. There's no better trust than having the domain name matching your brand name. It means that they can be sure that what they're interacting with is you, and so that is something that enhances brand value as well. The security around dotBrands, a brand protection perspective, if you like, is absolutely front and center to why a lot of people are considering or have taken the decision to go down the dotBrand route. You reduce your attack vector for third parties. You give them less opportunities to mimic you and to pretend to be you, and you improve your security, however many fold, with initiatives like NIS2 around and cybersecurity initiatives now being put into force by government at legislation level. This is becoming more and more important for brands, and it makes it easier for them to control that security. That streamlines user experience, again, through a single point of contact, a single destination, is something that I think and studies show that will reduce costs from a marketing spend, from a digital advertising spend in the future. So there is even though a dotBrand will cost you to set up and to run, I think there are some clear benefits in terms of lower costs for the future. And part of that is streamlining that user experience and the amount of assets you need to have in place to do business with those users. And ultimately, it's about flexibility and control. I talked about a .com domain before. .coms will not go away. They will be relevant and they will be valuable forevermore. But essentially, whether it's a .com or a .co.uk or .se, or doesn't really matter, you are only renting that space from those registry providers. Becoming your own registry and operating your dotBrand gives you the ultimate flexibility and control over that namespace, and is a very, very powerful argument for having that permanent presence that nobody can take away from you in the future. So those are 5 areas that we look at, but obviously we welcome discussions, with individual businesses as to what they're looking to achieve from having a dotBrand. And those discussions often lead down very specific routes in terms of the benefits and, some of the pitfalls as well. But the benefits of setting up that dotBrand and running it for yourselves. And we'd obviously, welcome those discussions at any stage. Back to you, Matt.
Yeah. So as Hayden said, I think these are 5 sort of common themes and threads through which any company can look at the opportunity. But for me, and I think I've been pretty consistent about this going back to 2012, really, is at the end of the day, it has to be relevant and useful to your specific organization and your specific company's digital strategy. It has to fit into that in a way that is going to make sense and add value to you, your company, and your customers going forward, right? So at the end of the day, yes, these are, as Hayden went through all five of these are really five strong thematic kind of ways to look at it. But I think what we saw in 2012 was a lot, because 2012 it was so new and there were so many unknowns and uncertainties. We saw a lot of people applying mostly out of defensive purposes, frankly. A lot of .brands. There were, Hayden, keep me honest, 660, I think, total in that range, somewhere about that. So it's about a third of the applications, I think,
I'll
if I
go with that.
recall correctly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, several hundred .brand applications. And as we, now look back over a dozen years, there's been some of those that never even got delegated. They never contracted. People, withdrew the applications. They terminated the agreements. Because I think they didn't have a robust plan in order to leverage the .brand, to use it to fit it into their digital strategy. I think we are in a much different place in 2026 than we were in 2012. Hayden mentioned, some of the cybersecurity initiatives that governments are undertaking. That in and of itself changes the landscape in 2026, right? That those things didn't exist in 2012, whereas they do now. And so in order to think about the obligations that companies have now and also the expectations from consumers, I think consumers are much savvier now from a security standpoint to expect that the companies that they interact with and the companies that they do business with are taking as many steps as they can to provide a secure experience for their customers. So again, it's not a one sort of look at it, but again, it's got to be right for your specific organization. So here are some, I mentioned, there's 660 some brands that were applied for. There's, certainly less than those being actively used today, but here are just a couple of examples. And the one that I think is most interesting is AI.Google, right? And so I don't know if everyone paid attention to this, but just recently, and now my video has turned off. Let me try to get myself back here. AI.com just recently sold for $70 million. So if Google or any other company wanted to try to, in this instance, Google is able to use AI.Google, and it did not cost them $70 million. Because they operate .Google, they're able to simply register the domain in their own TLD and use it for their own purposes. So if you're a company that has bought domain names on the aftermarket, maybe you haven't spent, hopefully you haven't spent $70 million, but you're spending tens of thousands of dollars perhaps on domain names. If you have a .brand, you're able to use those domains without buying them on the secondary market.
Yeah, cool. I mean, that's that's a good point. Talking about that flexibility and control that we mentioned on the previous slide, that's a great example of that. And it, you have ultimately you have the capacity to go wherever you want in that namespace, obviously assuming that it's within ICANN regulations and legality of wherever you may be. But as a business, you get to control exactly what you launch in terms of names within that namespace, and that can meet whatever future challenges or whatever future branding that you want to put into the place. So in terms of products, in terms of future initiatives, in terms of dealing with things like AI, absolutely gives you that complete flexibility.
One of the other use cases that we've seen to a more limited extent is companies that have leaned into the dot brand much more and done kind of more of a global rebrand around the dot brand. So two of the largest players that we see in that space were Canon and Barclays. You can see, Canon and Barclays. You've got Global.Canon, which is their sort of flagship, entry into Canon's business. Again, off of a dot brand domain name, and then you've got home.barclays, so you've got a financial services company and you've got a consumer products company in two different industries that have both kind of rebranded around specifically their dot brand. So a number of ways to think about this. When you've got a dot brand, it doesn't really matter where you are in the world. And so, a global company like Canon or Barclays might have historically used CCTLDs, so country code domains around the globe. So if you were in the UK, you would go to a UK site. If you were in Hong Kong, you would go to an HK site. And so this way, they're able to use the dot brand, a dot Canon, a dot Barclays, and so they don't need to have all of those different regional domains that are used depending on the country you're in. You kind of put everything under that dot brand umbrella. Again, I think we've seen fewer companies that have done this because obviously this is a much larger undertaking than rolling out product specific pages or services that are much more targeted. This is kind of more of a global rebrand, but definitely we've seen some companies do it, and it is, again, if it fits into your sort of global digital strategy, you do have the opportunity to take your dot brand and kind of roll everything up to the dot brand and provide that umbrella kind of global presence around your TLD.
So Matt, that leads me into one of the elephants in the room, right? That we come across time and time again when we're talking to people about round two. Why has there not been more use on more cases of things like this? Because for me, this is the ultimate kind of
Yeah.
statement of your digital presence. It gives you the security, the protection, the flexibility, everything that we talk about. All the benefits are encapsulated in this kind of thing, right? Now, and it does cost money, it takes investment, right? But it's not insurmountable. So, what surprised me
Yeah.
from the first round, and also the questions I get back from people saying, show me a use case in my industry that I can base this upon, very few and far between. So, the elephant in the room is, you know, why haven't more people in round one done this kind of thing? And it's something that leaves me scratching my head a lot, I have to admit. What's your opinion on that?
So a couple of things. Number one, I go back to the fact that in 2012, when people were applying for these, uh, they didn't necessarily have a fully built out plan on what they were going to do and how they were going to do it. So they applied mostly for defensive purposes. They applied to make sure that they at least could uh, get it and then figure out what to do with it down the road. So I think that primarily drove a lot of it. Number two, uh, a lot of the people that were involved in the decision to apply for the TLD back in 2012, by the time the TLD was delegated 5, 6, 7, 8 years later, the people that made the decision were no longer at the company.
Mm.
And so I think what happened was, the TLD got delegated several years later. Maybe the CISO or the head of IT or the chief marketing
Someone
officer
was
that's in
left
that
holding
role.
somebody else's baby kind of thing, right?
Exactly, right. What do
Yeah,
we do with
yeah,
this thing?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I think those two things combined really drive why we don't see more of this kind of activity. I do think, and I hope, that we'll see a different result from people who apply in 2026, because my hope is that people that apply really do have a much more robust, specific plan. Also, with the understanding that it's a years long journey. So, expecting to be able to launch and use the GTLD in a robust way even in 2027, when you're applying in 2026, it's most likely going to be even longer than that. So building in those kinds of the timeframes up front, I think will hopefully help folks be more successful with it going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's touching on an interesting point, right? So the journey really begins after delegation, right? So, planning for what you're going to do after delegation is we've got there is time, right? And I asked the question because I've been in some conversations where where in fact this has happened several times where the CEO and the head of legal are going, yeah, let's do it, and the e-commerce and the marketing side of the business have said no, we don't want to do it, we don't see the value, which has surprised me, enormously. And so, maybe there's time for people to reconsider. Some decisions have already been made. But in spite of what happened in 2012, I still believe 2026 offers a relatively unique opportunity to look to the future and to plan for the use of that. But certainly one of the questions that comes up time and time again is what happens in the first round.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. So, Matt, over to you on this. You want to talk through these?
Yeah, so just a couple other high level ones that I found up there at the top. Swoosh.Nike. Nike, obviously traditionally a consumer goods physical products brand, launched a domain off of their TLD to sort of bridge the gap between the physical goods and the online experience, which I thought was very interesting. Skygroup.Sky. So Sky's been actually one of the very active dotBrand operators, active in the brand registry group and talking about their experience. That's sort of the gateway into their entire world of broadcasting and content and corporate services. So that was an interesting one. And then, I talked about sort of that global umbrella, and Weber is one that does it in a very interesting way. So they use, instead of Weber.fr, Weber.uk, they've kind of switched it around, and they have country specific sites tied to the brand, which we see a couple other brand holders doing as well. And then just some other use cases that, when Hayden and I were kind of spitballing that, are kind of interesting to look at. Sports teams, creating this notion of community, fan groups, things like that. You've got communities, lawyer, doctor, things like that. And then the regional, the government ones, not necessarily things that brand holders are applying for, but need to be aware of when they launch, just from a registration defensive purposes. And then you've obviously got the traditional, true generic top level domains like .online, .app, .bet that are being sold through traditional registrar channels, that again, brand holders need to pay attention to once those things start to launch in the future from a defensive registration or blocking standpoint. Again, probably see more of that in this round than we did in 2012.
I think that's going to be fascinating. You have some of the key organizations that are talking about registering 250 plus or applying for 250 plus TLDs in this round. It's going to be fascinating to see who fights over what, because there will be some clashes, especially in the generic side of things. Personally, I think anything to do with Web3, crypto, Bitcoin, that kind of stuff is going to be fairly active, and I think there'll be lots of people going for the same stuff. So it'll be pretty interesting
I agree.
to look at that. I think what's worth saying from a dotBrand perspective is that if you are the trademark holder to the exact match of the dotBrand TLD that you want to apply for, then you stand a very good chance of getting that dotBrand. With a caveat that if somebody else with that trademark in different classes applies for the same dotBrand, there will be a process that you have to go through. But if you have a relatively unique brand that is trademarked and you want to go for your dotBrand TLD, you're not going to be fighting it out in the same way, I think, that some of the generics will be, based upon the amount of people that will apply for that string. That's a whole different story, and if you want to talk about that in a bit more detail, then obviously we can at another stage. So in terms of the timeline, ICANN in its quirkiness, let's say, changes timelines quite a lot. and there are various reasons for that, but this one's now fairly set in stone in terms of running up to the opening of the application window for round 2 on the 30th of April 2026, and that application period ending in August of the same year, this year. So, we're counting down to getting towards the end of, as what I said, it's a relatively complicated process, although not as complicated, I think, as some people make out. But we are getting to the stage where people need to make a decision on whether they're going to apply or not and how they're going to do that. So whilst August 2026 is the end of the submission window, we believe it's going to be at least 18 months, probably more like into 2028, when delegations will happen once ICANN have gone through their the application process. So what we're encouraging people to look at is the time in between application and delegation. They can look at from a planning perspective for what they do once those names are delegated. Obviously, how they're going to use that TLD, how they're going to roll it out, and obviously make sure that they're coordinating internally with other departments like IT, security, legal, marketing, e-commerce, as to how they're going to use that. So that's the timeline for the application window. In terms of program changes from 2012, there are a few. Personally, as I said, if you're going for a dotBrand and you've got a clear use case in mind, I don't think it's onerous in terms of the number of questions that you need to go through from an application process, but your application partner, which most people are using, people like us, Sabian, for example, should be able to help you with that. I don't think it's especially complicated. It's more of an administration challenge, if you like. But some of the changes from 2012 has made things a little bit easier. Brand TLDs are officially recognized in the program as a separate application category, if you like. So there's a much clearer path. The technical providers, RSPs, like Nominet, for example, in the UK, are pre-recognized. They've gone through that process, and so you don't have to go through the technical side of things. You can select one of those partners and they're already pre-approved, so that simplifies that process. There's no private auctions for the resolution of clashes or contention. There are some processes that ICANN have laid out that would be gone through. But again, it makes it more in control of ICANN and less in private hands, let's say. There's some prohibition on the closed generics, which are specifically prohibited in this application process, and it's made the whole thing a little bit more predictable. ICANN have put a lot of work into this latest round, and they're looking to make it more efficient, I think, to help themselves as well as to help the internet community in a little bit more detail. So those are some of the changes from 2012. Associated costs for applicants are this is an important thing to mention. I'd say these costs would deter the casual application, if you like. The application costs from ICANN themselves for each dotBrand is, if you're looking for a dotBrand, is $227,500. And that goes to ICANN, and that is payable at the point of application. There's normally, if you're using a third party to apply for the process, around $50,000 in terms of costs on top of that. There are some testing costs, and then there are some regular operation costs. What we encourage people to do is to look at that over a certain period of time, 10 to 12 years, for example, because that mitigates the cost of application over those years, and 10 years is the standard contractual period for a registry agreement with ICANN. And then there are some annualized running costs to do with obviously whoever you choose as an RSP, backend provider, your registrar of choice, who's going to help you to register and manage those domains, and also internal costs if you have specific overheads, for running the TLD internally. All of those can be scoped out in very, very precise detail prior to any application decision being made. So that gives you a very clear idea as to what it would cost to run the TLD. In terms of key steps from preparation, we are, like I said, getting to, I think, the end of the decision period as to whether to go for a dotBrand TLD or not. You've still got time, but and I'm sure there will be some people deciding in August, right at the end of the process, that it's something that they want to go for. But in terms of being able to submit the best laid plans and the best application, the recommendation from us is that we do that sooner rather than later. And so some of these things, would need to be done quickly. We do recommend that there's a cross-functional team internally that buy into the project. This shares costs, but it also looks at the future use and has an agreement for future use of the asset once you've got it. Obviously, looking at the program requirements and obligations, you need to understand what your obligations are as a registry operator contracted to ICANN, although a lot of that you can submit to third parties to do for you. Having a specific plan as to how that TLD fits into your digital strategy is an obvious point, but it is a key point. You need to understand and select the right partners in order to help you with the application process and rolling out the TLD for use after it has been delegated to you to get the optimal value out of that TLD. And gearing up for the application, making sure that you've got the right bits of paper in place. If you choose the right partner, they should be doing a lot of that for you once you've provided them with the initial details and information. But making sure that you're ready for that application is a key part of the process. So that's all we had time for in terms of the presentation. You'll have noticed I've lost my wingman. So Matt obviously hasn't paid his internet bill, so I'm not quite sure why he's cut off. He is in Idaho. I don't know if something's going on over there, but anyway, he's not here. So I'll try and cover some of the questions that we have in. We do have a few, so I'm just going to check on those and answer a couple of them. So we've got one question comes in about do we need to match the dotBrand application to a trademark? That's something that I touched on in the presentation itself. Simply, you need to match the TLD string or the dotBrand string to a registered trademark that you have. You can obviously research if anybody else has that trademark in different classes across the world to see if you may have any opposition to that. We do know of companies who have registered trademarks recently who they will be using specifically for dotBrands. So, there are some considerations on that side of things. But essentially, yes, it needs to match the trademark, and the secondary string or the fallback string that you need to provide as part of the process needs to be related to that trademark and probably goods and services as well. Do we know if there will be another round after this round? That is unknown. I think Matt mentioned that it's surprising to him and to me that it took 12 years to get to this particular stage for the second round. So whether there is a third round and when that will be, I think depends a lot upon what happens in this second round and ICANN's appetite for running something sooner or later down the line. I think there will be one, but it's difficult to say how long that will be. Finally, what are the risks in applying for a brand TLD? There are some risks involved. I think from the first round, we can say the biggest risk is if you apply for it and you... Oh, hello, Matt. I'm just going through the final question. Talking about risks of applying for a TLD. And I was just going to say that I think there's a couple of risks here. Firstly, from the first round, we can see that if you apply for it and spend the money on it and then don't use it, perhaps that is an investment that is not giving you value. And number two, financially, if you spend the money on the application and for whatever reason you pull out of that application at a later date, you stand to lose most, if not all, of that application fee, which is reasonably substantial. Other than that, I think the benefits far outweigh the risks. I would encourage people, even at this late stage, to consider what a brand TLD can do for their organization. And obviously, we'd be delighted to talk to people if they wanted to in a little bit more detail about what that might be. So we're at time. We're at 45 minutes. Matt's disappeared again. So I think he's going to owe me a drink or two after this. But thank you, everybody, for your attendance. Appreciate it. We'll be in touch concerning a copy of the material, and also with our contact details. And I look forward to discussing in more detail with any and all of you the dotBrand possibilities that we have for the future. Thanks once again. Have an excellent rest of the day. Bye-bye.